By the time they set the first rebar, the sound of metal against stone was already rewriting my life. The wall rose on my grass, gray and officious, like a verdict I never heard read. It wasn't just concrete. It was trespass, history, and something worse, a warning to come. On Saturday morning, the sun came up pale and stunned, like it couldn't quite believe what it was looking at, and neither could I. There was an excavator, its arm already chewing into the hill that used to be my backyard's gentle slope. Men in neon vests had popped chalk lines across my grass, and someone had driven steel stakes where my daughter's sandbox had been last summer. I stood on the porch in bare feet and a t-shirt that said, "No bad days," feeling like the words were lying. The HOA president, Brett Hollis, was there with his mirrored sunglasses and his clipboard, talking about slope failure and liability, pointing toward my lot like a weatherman announcing a storm. I felt the word, my claw at my throat. "Excuse me," I said, stepping off the porch into the wet grass. "What exactly are you doing?" The foreman, a man with a kind face and concrete dust in his eyebrows, gave a half shrug in my direction. "Retaining wall," he said. "We're on a timeline." Brett slid over, the smell of his cologne bright and lemony against the diesel in the air. "Nora, we sent out notices. Slope stabilization for the community. Engineer approved." He said my name like it was a speed bump. "You're stabilizing my backyard," I said. "On my lot." He flipped through his clipboard as, if it contained a script, we were obligated to perform. "It's within the easement," he said, not looking at me. "Drainage and maintenance." I knew the easement, 5 feet along the rear property line for utility access, not for pouring a 10-foot scab of concrete through my garden. I also knew something else. 2 winters ago, a storm had chewed a ditch alongside the fence, and I'd paid a surveyor, Caldwell & Sons, to mark the line with bright orange caps. I'd left those little plastic hats like a crown across the grass, a line I could live by. They were gone. "Hold up," I said. My voice sounded wrong in my mouth, careful and brittle, like glassware I didn't own. "Where are the survey stakes?" Brett kept his sunglasses on me, reflective, making me look like a ghost standing there. "Removed during prep," he said. "Interfered with equipment." "On my lot," I repeated, like repetition might stitch reality back together. The sound of the excavator's teeth scraped exposed rock, my mouth filled with the metallic taste of fear. June's blue plastic shovel lay on the slope, half buried in dirt, like a hand reaching for help. I took photos. Then I took out the binder that lived above the fridge, where I keep every adult thing that scares me. Insurance, taxes, the plat map with its careful black rectangles and that smug north arrow at the top. I laid the survey over the grass like a spell. My boundary line cut clean across the yard, a foot beyond the old fence posts. The chalk the crew had snapped lay 3 full feet inside it. I crouched and pushed my fingers into the soil until I felt something hard and cold, a brass pin hidden beneath the grass. When I tugged the weeds aside, the little disc winked in the sun like a coin at the bottom of a well. "There you are," I whispered, like you whisper to a friend you thought you'd lost. I tied a strip of blue ribbon around it, something bright and indelible. The foreman saw and shifted his weight. "Ma'am, I just do what I'm told," he said, and I believed him. I believed what the machines were doing wasn't his decision any more than the tide decides to drown the beach. "You can't pour on my property," I said to Brett. He took a breath that belonged in a boardroom, measured and dry. "If you interfere, Nora, the HOA can fine you," he said. "We have authority here." His words landed like hail. I was not an arguing person. I was a make-do person, a patch-it with duct tape person. But I could feel a seam opening inside me, a place where I was not going to fold. I went inside and called the city. The permit and inspection office had a homepage that looked like a bulletin board in a church hallway. Links no one had dusted. Font choices made by committee. I clicked through to search current permits and typed my address with fingers that missed the keys twice. No results found. My heart thudded, slow and hard, like someone knocking on a locked door in a house I didn't know I owned. I dialed the number listed for construction without permit, Half expecting no one to answer on a Saturday, a man picked up on the second ring. "Permit office, Patel," he said, warm and efficient, like a good umbrella. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, and when I ran out of words, he asked me to repeat the address, to spell my last name, to describe the equipment on site, the color of the vests, the name on the side of the pickup. "And you're saying this wall is within your property?" he asked. 3 feet in, I said, maybe more. "Okay," he said. "Take photos of everything. Don't confront anyone. I'll check our records, and if there's no permit, I'll come by." "Today?" I asked, because hope is a fragile animal, but it still stretches its neck. "Today?" he said. Around me, the house breathed the way empty houses breathe, appliances ticking, the wall clock loud, a hum in the vent like faraway bees. When I stepped back outside, a section of trench had been cut and boxed with splintering 2x10s, a rib cage waiting for a pour. Concrete trucks don't smell like anything until water hits powder, and then they smell like a storm you can hold. I walked to the fence line and set my chair where the chalk-cut grass. A truck's backup alarm pecked at the morning like a woodpecker, and over it I heard a new sound, a city engine idling. Relief came like rain on hot concrete. Then Brett's sunglasses flashed toward me. Finally, someone with authority had arrived, though authority, I learned, can shatter like glass too. The city SUV pulled to the curb with the soft finality of an official line drawn in sand. Hazard lights ticked amber. I could see my own face, small, hopeful, ridiculous, reflected in its window. Before the door opened and a man stepped out, tall, tidy beard, fluorescent vest over a blue Oxford. "Ms. Wren," he said. His voice matched the phone call, steady, certain. "Yes," I said. "Nora." He glanced around, fast, taking in the trenches, the forms, the excavator's raised arm like a crane at a harbor. "Patel," he said, showing a laminated badge. "Permit and inspection." The foreman saw him and lifted a palm. The excavator coughed to a stop. Silence pooled in the yard, thick after the machine noise, and I realized I had been bracing my jaw against the vibrating ground. Brett arrived on a breeze of citrus. "We've got an emergency mitigation here," he said before Patel asked, his smile polite enough to draw blood. "Engineer approved, community safety." Patel nodded once, as if filing that whole sentence into a folder labeled "We'll see." He turned to me with gentler eyes. "You mentioned a survey pin?" I led him to the brass disc I'd brushed free, the blue ribbon fluttering like a throat. He crouched, pressed a finger to the metal, looked at me. "Do you have the plat?" I had it ready like a talisman. We spread it on my patio table, the paper pinned by 2 coffee mugs and my phone. His pen made soft tapping sounds as he read. He took out a laser measure, blinked it against the fence, the forms, the edge of my azalea bed, and then paced it himself with the kind of confidence I envy in people who know exactly what their feet are doing. When he straightened, he had that expression I've only ever seen on pilots hitting turbulence, collected, busy with procedures inside. "Gentlemen," he called to the crew, "please hold all operations until I conclude verification." The foreman gave a 2-fingered salute and waved his guys back. Brett's smile tightened. "As I said, this is emergency work," Brett repeated, slower now, as if speaking to a child. "We have an engineer's letter and a liability assessment. Rain event last spring compromised the slope behind lots 12 through 18. This wall protects the community, and I'm lot 13, I said, trying not to choke on the irony. Patel looked at Brett. "Do you have a permit?" "We filed for one," Brett said too quickly. "Expedited. The city knows." Patel pulled a small tablet from his vest. Pocket tapped, frowned. "Nothing in the system." "Then it's a filing delay," Brett said. "We sent it yesterday. Some clerk. Emergency work does allow for immediate stabilization in life safety situations," Patel said. "But it still requires notification to our office within 24 hours, and it doesn't authorize crossing property lines without owner consent." Brett's sunglasses tipped in my direction. "We have an easement." "Drainage," I said. 5 feet. Patel's finger rested on the plat's neat printing like a blessing. Recorded 5-foot drainage and utility easement along the rear line. The poured forms are 8 feet into Ms. Wren's lot. He looked up at Brett. Additionally, I'm noting removal of survey markers, which is a violation under state law. The foreman's head ducked like he was trying to make himself less visible. He met my eyes and gave a tiny apology I felt in my throat. Brett's smile vanished so completely it was like he'd dropped it behind the bushes. We're within our rights, he said. We can fine her if she impedes. Patel didn't even blink. You can't fine a property owner for refusing an unpermitted encroachment. He reached into his bag and took out a red card with adhesive on the back. It was the color of a cardinal against winter. I'm issuing a stop work order on this scope. He wrote with neat block letters, the pen scratching official-sounding decisions into existence. Then he walked to the formwork and smoothed the red tag across raw plywood like he was soothing a fevered brow. The card glowed, a heartbeat pinned to the bones of the wall. I'll need names of the contractor, the engineer of record, and your HOA counsel, he said, facing Brett. I'll also need a site plan showing limits of work and owner consents. Until then, any work within Ms. Wren's property is prohibited, and the trench along her line needs to be secured. The crew went quiet in the way of men who suddenly see courtrooms in their calendars. The foreman spoke first. We can backfill temporary and throw up barricade tape. Do that, Patel said. No more excavation, no concrete deliveries. Cover rebar caps. A concrete truck down the block exhaled disappointment and turned its heavy head away. Relief hit me so hard my knees took an extra breath to stand under me. The blue of the sky seemed to deepen by a shade that only exists after a decision is made. Brett stepped closer, close enough that the scent of his cologne went sweet and then sick. You're making a mistake, Nora, he said, quiet. Everyone's dues are going to go up. If that slope goes, it'll be on you. Fear isn't a permit, I said. My voice shook anyway. You don't get to build in my garden because you're worried. He lifted his phone, snapped a picture of Patel's red tag like he wanted to save the moment he was entirely in the wrong. We'll be in touch, he said, which is the HOA version of a curse. He gathered his clipboard, his indignation, his sunglasses, and marched down the hill. A couple of neighbors who'd wandered over in shorts and curiosity drifted back to their porches like birds who'd come too close to a cat. Patel turned softer again. I'm sorry, he said. This is a mess. Thank you, I said. My throat ached like I had swallowed a stone. I didn't want to be that person. You're the person whose line is here, he said, tapping the blue ribbon lightly. That's all. We walked the edge together the way you do around a cliff. He took photos of everything, angles that made my yard look like evidence because it was. He measured the distance from the pin to the edge of the form, to the trench, to the old fence post listing like drunks. He wrote code sections in his notebook, numbers I'll see in my sleep now. Next steps, he said. They submit a permit. They provide stamped drawings, soil report, and proof of rights within the easement. Anything outside the easement requires owner consent. If they encroached already, we'll require correction. If they ignore the stop, call me. He tore a card from his pad and handed it to me. It felt heavier than paper. Will they retaliate? I asked. It sounded small and very true. They might send letters, he said. They might try to fine you. Don't pay. Document. If they trespass again, call the police and then us and call your surveyor. Fresh stakes. I have one, I said. Caldwell and Sons. They can come Monday. A rumble of thunder rolled somewhere too far to be real. Yet, the air had that tightness before a storm. My brain leapt ahead. If it rains, water will find every open cut and gut it deeper. Neighbors will point. The wall that isn't will be my fault too. Should they backfill now? I asked, glancing at the dark slit of earth like a wound. They should make it safe, Patel said. Temporary fill. Sandbags if they have them. He raised his voice to the foreman. You heard me. We'll do it, the foreman said, already waving his men toward shovels. He paused, met my eyes. Ma'am, I'm sorry. It's not how we like to do things. I know, I said, because it was true. The men were just men with jobs and knees and mortgages. It was the machine around them that scared me, the HOA gearwork that turned them like cogs. They filled the trench like people making amends, one shovel at a time. By noon, the yard looked less like a surgery and more like a bruise. Caution tape fluttered along the forms, the red tag bright. Brett was nowhere. The concrete truck had found someone else's future to pour. My phone dinged. Go notice. Notice of interference. Fine, $150. Failure to comply may result in additional sanctions. Showed Patel. He made a face like he'd bitten a lemon. Ignore that for now, he said. If they escalate, the city attorney likes a good overreach case. After he left, the light felt lonely. I picked June's blue shovel out of the dirt and washed it with the hose until it shone stupidly, cheerful in my hand. Last summer, she'd used it to bury plastic ponies and then cry that they were gone. We dug them up together laughing. Today felt like the opposite of that. By late afternoon, Caldwell and Sons sent a tech named Lacey, hair in a braid, tripod over her shoulder, like a flag girl marching into battle. She found 3 more pins with her receiver singing softly. Little, coins at the corners of my life. She set bright stakes and ribboned them until my yard looked like a parade route. You're good, she said, tapping a nail cap. Your line's solid. I needed to hear that, I said, and almost cried at the kindness of certainty. Neighbors drifted by in the long gold light, pretending to fetch mail or drag bins they didn't need. Maria from across the cul-de-sac stopped, arms folded tight. Told that man they can't take your yard, she said, chin high in a way I loved. You stand your ground, Nora. Behind her, Mr. Benson shook his head without stopping. It's just 3 feet, he said. For everybody's good, I surprised myself. Take 3 feet of your yard then, I said, and he looked at me like I'd spoken a language he refused to learn. By dusk, the caution tape made small papery sounds in the wind. The rebar sang tinny notes whenever a gust caught it right. I locked the back gate and double-checked the windows like the wall might climb into the house in the night. At 9, an email pinged, City of Fairhaven, stop work order confirmed, additional inspection Monday. Please maintain site security. 10 minutes later, a piece of paper slid under my front door. The shadow moved away before I could fling it open. We regret to inform you that emergency stabilization will proceed Monday morning, regardless of city interference. You have left us no choice. I stood there with both notices in my hands, the city's red and the HOA's threat, and felt the line in my yard hum like a live wire. I wasn't sleeping. The night had a job for me, and it was simply this: stay. At Ehi, 6:52 a.m., 2 engines idled at my curb like competing hearts. One wore HOA orange, the other city blue. The red tag fluttered in a mean little wind. I set my coffee down, picked up my binder, and understood. A line isn't paint. It's a voice, saying no today. The morning smelled like wet metal and nerves. I'd already dropped June at preschool, kissed the top of her head twice without explaining why, because how do you tell a 4-year-old that grown-ups sometimes forget where they end? Brett stood at the bottom of my yard in a jacket too sharp for the hour. His sunglasses were on even though the sun had not yet hauled itself over the roofs. The foreman, same kind eyes, stood beside him, hands shoved into his vest pockets like a kid who knows the principal wants a word. The excavator's arm was lowered, asleep but dangerous. Patel arrived in the city blue SUV, and this time he did not come alone. A woman shut the passenger door behind her, black ponytail, hard hat tucked under her arm, the word building glittering on her vest in a way that said sovereign. A uniformed officer followed, not hands on gun, just there, like a sun that sets the time of day. Patel tipped his chin at me. Morning, Nora. Morning, I said, and tried not to wrap myself in the word like a blanket. The woman extended a hand. Alvarez, building official. Her grip was brief, professional, like a signature snapped into place. Brett stepped forward. Smile reassembled. Lemon and outrage. Ms. Alvarez, we appreciate the city's attention, but as I've explained, this is an emergency. We can't wait for someone to move a piece of paper through a slow department while the hillside is actively failing. Alvarez looked at the forms, the red tag, the ribboned stakes like the world's weirdest party. She didn't look at Brett at all. "This piece of paper is a permit," she said. "It protects life safety and property rights. You don't have one." He lifted a sheaf of documents like salvation. "We have an engineer's letter." He tapped the seal like a talisman. Patel took it and flipped through. The paper felt loud in the quiet. He paused. "This isn't stamped. It's a draft. No engineer registration number. No liability statement." Brett's jaw worked. "It's pending." "Like your permit," Alvarez said. "And your authority to trespass." The foreman cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're happy to work within the easement for now," he said. "We can address the section behind the common path while the paperwork. No one works beyond recorded easement without consent," Alvarez said. She turned to the officer. "Officer Lane, if there's any attempt to cross onto Ms. Wren's property, issue a trespass warning and phone me." He nodded, calm as a lake. Brett's smile cracked. "Is this really necessary? We're protecting everyone here. If she wasn't so—" He stopped himself on the edge of a word that would have broken loose like rock. "So insistent about her property being her property," I said. I didn't mean to, but the sentence jumped out bright as a flag. "So, unwilling to let you pour concrete into my garden because you feel entitled?" That was when the hill itself spoke. A low, wet sound came from the far end of the slope, lot 18, and then a rip, like fabric under too much weight. We all turned. A section of the common area gave way, the earth slumping in a dirty sigh. Mud ate a piece of the crushed gravel path the HOA had laid with a ribbon cutting and speeches last year. A neighbor in a robe shrieked, more out of the surprise of it than danger, but my stomach hit my shoes anyway. "Sandbags!" the foreman shouted, and his men ran, grateful to have something to do that was indisputably right. Patel was already talking into his radio. Alvarez moved too, fast and precise. "Within the common area only," she called to the crew. "Do not cross any private line. Lay plastic, divert to the culvert." Brett looked at me like I had called the ground to misbehave. Guilt is the oldest habit I own. It flooded me out of nowhere. If I hadn't fought, if I'd let them build. But Patel was beside me, voice low, gears clicking into place. "This wouldn't have stopped that," he said. "That's a drainage failure, not a retaining wall issue. The wall they framed is too far from that toe to help. Improper routing around the culvert. No energy dissipation." He shook his head. "My guess? Someone skipped the city's stormwater. Plan last year when they improved the path." Brett's face flickered. He said nothing. Alvarez moved like a conductor, and the foreman's crew became an orchestra. Plastic unrolled down the slope. Sandbags shouldered into lines. Straw, wattles placed like commas directing the water's sentence. It was somehow beautiful. Order wrestled from panic. I handed the foreman bottled waters from my fridge as they worked. He met my eyes. "Thanks," he said, then lowered his voice. "Listen, I know I shouldn't, but—" He glanced at Brett and stepped closer. "We got an email from the HOA Council Friday. Said the tiebacks on the original design would extend under the common path into the county-owned right-of-way. County said no. HOA didn't want to pay for a deeper wall with micropiles. They told us to adjust alignment within available private property." His mouth tightened. "That meant you." Heat licked up my neck. "So they wanted a discount wall? In my yard?" He straightened. "I'm not supposed to say it like that. But yeah." I looked at Brett. He stood with his hands on his hips like a statue of a man who thinks he should be commemorated. His sunglasses reflected a tiny version of our emergency. Alvarez was back at our side in 3 minutes that stretched like wire. "We're stable for now," she said. "We'll send Public Works to assess the culvert. Mr. Hollis, you need to understand. You're not in charge today." His mouth flattened. "We'll fix it. We always fix it." "You'll fix it lawfully," she said. Within your common area, with actual permits, with plans stamped by a licensed engineer, and you will not touch Ms. Wren's lot without her consent. He opened his mouth, closed it. We're going to our attorney, he said instead. We'll get a judge to— You won't, a new voice said. We all turned. A woman in a gray suit walked up the cul-de-sac like fog that had decided to take human form. She carried a thin briefcase. I recognized the weight of her face. Late nights, tight deadlines, a belief in paper sharpened to a blade. City Attorney's office, she said, handing Brett a card he didn't take. We filed for an emergency injunction on the stop work order. Given your letter to Ms. Wren last night, a judge will sign it within the hour. If you violate the red tag, you'll face per-day penalties, and the contractor's license will be implicated. She glanced at the foreman. You don't want that. His head jerked. No, ma'am. Brett took off his sunglasses finally. Without them, he looked less like a villain, and more like a man who had fallen in love with the reflection of power. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he told me. What you're building on my land would be illegal with or without a storm, I said. You don't get to change that because you're scared. Fear isn't a permit. Something in the air shifted then. Maybe it was only the sound of the excavator's engine cooling, the tick-tick-tick of a machine accepting its limits. Maybe it was the neighbors gathering in a crescent at the curb, Maria with her arms crossed, Mr. Benson holding his morning paper like a shield. A toddler lifted a hand and waved at the officer. He waved back. Fine, Brett said, the word torn from his throat like a bandage. We'll seek consent. My consent, I said. Which you won't get, and you'll withdraw the fine. He smiled in a way that was all teeth and no warmth. We'll see what our counsel says. The city attorney raised an eyebrow. Your counsel will tell you to stop digging the hole you're standing in. By 10, the injunction papers had been served. 4 copies, gold seals, paper that whispered, wait. Alvarez taped one to the formwork below the red tag like a second heart. The crew set their tools in the grass and waited for instruction. The foreman approached me with a business card-shaped apology. We'll be back when this is straight, he said, with a new plan, somewhere else. Thank you, I said, and meant it. At noon, I met Patel and Alvarez at City Hall under fluorescent lights that made everyone the same shade of tired. The hallway echoed with shoes and policy. We sat at a long table with a carafe of coffee and stacks of code sections. Brett arrived with an older man whose tie had seen better summers. HOA counsel hissed in his ear. The city attorney smiled without joy. Things that change lives don't always do it with thunder. Sometimes they do it with minutes. The judge called in by phone. The voice on the speaker was all angles. Papers were described, exhibits marked, the words property and encroachment, and notice and emergency repeated until they turned into lattice work. In the end, the order was clean. No work on or over Ms. Wren's lot without written consent, fines for prior encroachment, restoration plan required, HOA to pay survey and inspection costs, rescind unauthorized fine, and cease retaliatory notices. Brett didn't look at me when he signed it. I didn't look at him when I slid the copy into my binder. I only felt my shoulders lower in a way I hadn't realized they'd risen since the first shovel. The restoration took weeks. There were meetings, there were emails, there were new stakes, brighter ribbons, black silt fence erected like a veil. The HOA hired a new geotechnical engineer. The paths were regraded. The culvert got a stone apron to break the fall of water. The retaining wall, when it finally came, stayed obediently outside my line, supported by micropiles sunk like iron. Trees. They planted native grasses along the slope so the hill could knit itself back together. One afternoon, while men planted switches of willow at the toe, Brett walked up my porch steps without his sunglasses. He held a letter. He cleared his throat. I came to apologize, he said. The word sounded expensive. We withdrew the fine. The board has learned from this. He swallowed. I'm stepping down. I took the letter. I didn't ask what had finally cost him his crown. Maybe it was the judge's voice. Maybe it was the neighbors' looks. Maybe it was that he'd finally seen his face in the red tag. "Thank you," I said. I didn't offer more. He nodded, grateful and left. June and I planted irises along the line that spring. She dug with her blue shovel and asked why ribbons danced in the wind like a party. "Because we're celebrating," I told her. "Because the ground is ours to celebrate." "Do we share?" she asked. "Because that's what preschool teaches you." "We do," I said, and brushed soil over the bulbs. "We share the parts. We choose. We say yes to the good things. And we say no when somebody tries to take what's ours." She considered, then handed me a worm like a gift. The irises came up purple and impossible, mouths open, telling the bees all the reasons they were there. Patel's card stayed on my fridge. The blue ribbon around the brass pin bleached to a soft sky color in the sun. The wall down the slope held. When it rained, water scrolled the way someone had drawn it to go, not the way panic would have pushed it. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd sit at the edge of the yard and listen. The line in the grass didn't hum anymore. It spoke, though, in the way held ground speaks. Not all walls are concrete. Not all rescues are loud. And sometimes authority doesn't arrive on a truck. It arrives in you when you decide, finally, where you end.